I'm Lindsay Sturkey, and welcome to Simple Spiritual Practices. In each episode of this podcast, we'll talk about one tangible practice that will help you know yourself and God better. Most of these practices can be done in 5 minutes or less, so you can easily try it out today. If you are ready to experience real growth in your life, or if you want fresh ideas on how to approach your time with God, this podcast is for you. There's a question that I want to invite you to consider today that might seem kind of odd at first, but I think it's an important one to ask ourselves, and it's this: what do you want? When you hear that question, what comes to mind? Again, this might seem like kind of a weird question to ask ourselves because why does it matter what we want? We learn from a very young age that we just don't get everything that we long for, and there are many times when what we want either isn't good for us or just not possible. So why ask ourselves that question at all? The thing is, there are many times in Scripture where we actually see Jesus ask people that very question or some form of it, of what do you want? So why would he ask this question? And how did people respond? How would we respond? So I want us to look at one example of this together. In Mark chapter 10, we read about a blind man who's named Bartimaeus, who is sitting on the road begging as Jesus passes by. So it says this starting in verse 47. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." And then Jesus asks this man a very simple question: "What do you want me to do for you?" That's a really powerful question, isn't it? Now, at first, it might seem kind of backwards that Jesus asks the man this question because we kind of tend to think our faith is about what Jesus wants us to do for him. And that is part of it, of course. But with this question, it's like Jesus is turning it around, asking, what do you want from me? And that might feel a little selfish to us to consider that question of what do we want from Jesus. It might feel kind of self-centered because, again, we feel like we should be asking Jesus what he wants us to do for him. But Jesus asks this blind and needy beggar, "What do you want me to do for you?" So the blind man's answer was kind of obvious. He says, "I want to see." So let me ask, do you know how you would answer this question right now? If Jesus said, "What do you want me to do for you?" how would you answer? Maybe like the blind man who wanted sight, your answer feels kind of obvious too. There might be a decision that needs to be made and you'd really like clarity on what to do. Or maybe you have a financial need or stress about money. But I also wonder if there's something more you'd want from Jesus beyond those surface things. It's fine, of course, to want the obvious things like things about stress or decisions we need to make because Jesus meets us there too. But I also wonder what we'd find if we would dig a little bit deeper and discover what it is that we really long for. What is that deeper desire under the surface that we see in our lives? So going back to those examples, maybe you want clarity on a decision, but really the deeper desire is for peace. Maybe that obvious thing that comes to mind that you want is for a financial stress to be removed, for money to be provided to meet a need. But underneath that is really the desire for security, for safety. So again, when we consider this question of what we want, we have to move past that feeling that this is selfish, worrying that what we want is too self-centered. Let's be honest. Let's not hesitate to name what we really want. Because the thing is, as Jesus asks us this question, we are not demanding that Jesus meets our desires. We are simply naming them. And as we bring those desires to Jesus, he will reveal to us what it is that we truly want. Because as it turns out, what we really want and even what we need is actually Jesus himself. because He is our peace and our security and our joy. He is the true source of every good thing. So as we ask ourselves what we want, as we notice our desires and name them, answering Jesus' question of what do you want me to do for you, He is ready and waiting to meet us in those desires, pointing us to what our heart truly longs for, which is really more of Him. So chances are, if you're listening to a podcast about spiritual practices like this one, that tells me that you really do want more of Jesus, or at least you want to want more of Him. And quite often, the desire for more of Jesus is the perfect place to start, because that desire is what will motivate you to get creative in finding time and space to connect with God. Jesus sees your heart in that, and He wants to meet you in it. So what is it that you really want from Jesus? What is your heart desperate for today? Maybe you want to grow in patience, or you need rest. For you, it might be that you want some relief from anxiety or sadness. Whatever it is, Jesus is ready to hear from you. And I believe that He wants to show you that underneath all of that, in your desires for the small, everyday things, even to those deeper cries of your heart, your true desire is for Jesus Himself. This week's practice is very simple. Take just a few minutes to reflect on the question that Jesus asked Bartimaeus in Mark chapter 10. What do you want me to do for you? You may even want to read that whole story, which is in Mark chapter 10, verses 46 through 52. And as you read, imagine that you are the blind beggar in the crowd calling out for Jesus. Think about how it would feel for Jesus to say, "Call him to me," and to ask you that question, "What do you want me to do for you?" You might even want to write down a list of desires that come to mind, to just name them in the presence of Jesus. And then say a prayer of release and surrender. Confess that more than anything, what you really want and need is more of Jesus Himself. And if you don't feel that desire, that's okay. Just be honest about it. Tell Jesus that you want to want more of Him, and trust that He is going to meet you right where you're at. Thanks for joining me today for this episode of Simple Spiritual Practices. If you want to download a free principle for this week's practice or find other resources to help you take next steps, visit lindsaysturkey.com/free. This podcast is part of the New Hope Podcast Network, and production is done by Darren Hansen. You can check out all the podcasts on the network by visiting newhopechurch.cc/listen. Make sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode, and we'll be back with a new episode next week.